Ja, mera.
This thing, so, but if you stick to this, Hey guys, Chris Jenkins here, back to episode 3 of the podcast, and if you watched the previous one, I talked a lot about what I've been up to in isolation, the album I've been working on, and my first album, which has now been mixed and mastered, so it's essentially finalized and ready to be put out. I just need to actually go about the distribution process and all that stuff, so that's currently what I'm up to as well. What else do we talk about? Some perhaps the unhealthier habits I think that have gone into perhaps the album and albums so far, and just having a better balance and not being so extreme with things, because again I tend to be very much all in, so I've just been very much trying to practice having more of balance and not being so extreme with, I guess, my focus and my energy, and just being able to enjoy downtime and not be so obsessed all the time with trying to make progress and trying to make an impact, etc. So those are some of the things I talked about in the previous episode. And again, if you haven't watched that, there might be a link there if I can put one. Otherwise, there'll be one in the description. You can watch the previous episode and sort of catch up with that. And if perhaps there's things in there that you relate to or perhaps resonate with. But in this episode, I'll begin with the fact that we're going to start using or implementing a Q&A section at the beginning of these episodes. You know, if you follow me on Instagram, I do a lot of Q&As there. But one thing I've always almost felt somewhat dissatisfied with is the fact that I tend to only have 15 seconds to answer those questions. And a lot of the time, they're really good questions. And I hate that I can't elaborate more because I usually have a lot to say. And it's funny because a lot of those clips you probably don't realize, but I re-record so many times because I'll sort of configure all the things I want to say and then try condense it and like funnel it into a more synthesized, straight to the point message, which is very hard for me to do. So that's also why I have this podcast, and you'll see that that's evident. But yeah, we'll just get straight into just some. These are going to be broader questions that I'm answering because I've only now today put on my story for people to submit questions specifically for the next episode. But I just sort of went back in my sort of archive of questions and just picked some of the sort of general topics and things I get asked. So we'll just hit it off with number one, and that is motivation. Being able to stay motivated and to continue to practice consistently and all that good stuff. So I think one of the number one reasons for people lacking motivation, and myself included, is very much based off of goals. If you don't know why you're working towards something or why you should be regimented or disciplined in some aspect, then it becomes very hard to, I don't know, you need a point behind what you're doing, right? If you're doing something just that doesn't seem to have any meaning to you, or that there's no real outcome that you actually desire, like if you're just doing something for the sake of doing something, obviously it's going to be hard to remain motivated. But if you're, say, for example, a musician, a drummer, and you have a goal, like I want to be an educator, I want to be the number one teacher in this area, I want to be a touring musician, I would love to play for this artist. Goals like that will really help create that sort of vision and clarity for you, and again give you reason to practice and to know why you're putting in the effort and the energy and the hours that you are. Because again, if you don't have a goal, or your goal is extremely vague, then it's going to be hard to be motivated. And that's something I've definitely experienced to an extent in the past. Although for me, I've known that drums is just what I want to do. I want to play drums for a living, be a touring musician, which again is somewhat of a vague goal, but it's a huge goal for me. And in a sense, the fact, that reminds me that it's actually good also to have a bigger picture goal. This is kind of a paradox in a way, because if you only have a big picture goal, that can tend to be extremely overwhelming and demotivating because it's not very digestible. That's where my sort of logic behind my approach to goals is to have, I always think bigger picture and I'm very future oriented. But once you have that goal, in my opinion, I think one of the best things you can do is to take that goal and reverse engineer the steps that you need to take. A lot of the times, those steps won't always look like what you expect to, but it helps a lot if you. This is actually one thought experiment I tend to apply, which is to think of those goals and to go about constructing it or reverse engineering those steps as if I was trying to help someone else. That tends to help me because I can get a bit wrapped up in my own head and this and that. So it just helps if I imagine myself trying to counsel or guide someone else and help them get to the goal that they're aiming to achieve, which is kind of weird, but that works for me. But the point being that reverse engineering digestible steps towards that bigger picture goal is so helpful, because and like goal, having a goal is everything. If you don't have a goal, if you have nothing to strive for, again, you're going to lack purpose, meaning, and you're going to probably lack inspiration or intrinsic motivation, should I say. So I've always thought that was one of the biggest reasons I think people tend to lack motivation, especially when it comes to putting in countless of hours, that the hours that are required to truly be a master or to accomplish big goals. It really requires a lot of dedication. So it's, you need reason to be dedicated. If you don't have that goal or even the smaller goals, then it's, things, it can make all the effort that you put in feel very aimless, and that's just it becomes so much more difficult than if you have clear goals. You know what you're aiming for. This is what I have to do to get there. These are the people I need to know. This is the area I need to investigate or delve and put myself into, etc. So clarify goals. It helps so much. Have a big picture, a big goal, a dream. I think most of us do, but then learn to sort of break that into more digestible goals. So that's often a question that I get asked about. I've been playing drums for about 12 years now, and I'm still just as motivated, if not more, than I've ever been, because I still have my bigger picture goal of wanting to be a musician, full-time touring musician. But then also I have smaller goals like venues that I want to play in, people I want to play with, things like that. And maybe I should actually elaborate on some of those, but for me, the Domino Club in Leeds is an awesome sort of jazz fusion club, if you will, here in Leeds, and I've seen some amazing bands there, and it's just such a awesome, intimate venue, and to me, it would just be so cool to play there. So that's definitely one of my goals, which then, because I have that goal, that's very much helped direct me in the kinds of people I need to associate myself with and the people I need to get to know, but also to note that it shouldn't be from a stance of what can I take from them, what can I take. It's very much what can I give, and when you tend to give to people, they tend to give back. Or it's one of the best ways I think to go about it than just going up to a bunch of really cool, awesome full-time virtuosic musicians and just being, hey, can you get me this? Hey, how did you, ask questions, but don't be a leech, try and offer any value you can to them. I've done that to some extent here. I haven't been living in Leeds for too long, but in the year or so that I have lived here, I've been able to set up things like drum sheds, really get to know people on a personal level, just small things like buying them drinks after a gig, telling them they did an awesome job, just being supportive. That will really build a lot closer relationships. And if you know anything about the music industry, it's very much about who you know and who you are as a person, because there's especially in today's age, there's so many great musicians out there. So one of the main things that's going to separate you from those other skillful musicians, even the ones that are better than you, is your personality. You need to be someone that people can get along with, being someone that people like, people will word of mouth, things like that. So you don't want to have bad blood and bad rumors, etc. So your personality is going to be almost everything. So be true to yourself, know what your goal is, and you can express that very much so to those that you are in your circle or desired circle. And just doing things like that, I think, just help sort of narrow that path that you're on again, so you're not feeling so aimless and lost, and you're going to the practice room, you're putting in all these hours, but again, you're just kind of lost in your drift. So that's definitely been something I've thought about a lot in terms of motivation, is having goals and then breaking it down into steps in regards to where you want to be, the places you want to play, the people you want to meet and be acquaintances with, etc. They're all very, very important foundations to motivation, at least in the context of music and from what I know. And another like, I get this kind of question all the time, and it's completely understandable. This was the exact kind of thing I was always searching up and asking people about back in the day. And it's very important to still do so. I'm not trying to discredit that, but that question tends to be, how can I get faster at, for example, single strokes? How can I get faster at double strokes? How can I get good at the swivel technique? These questions I've got multiple times, and I don't want to sound annoyed by that. Not at all. I like that I'm honored that I have people who seek that sort of advice or perspective from myself. So that's very humbling and flattering in many ways, but I find myself answering them in a very similar manner, and that tends to be that if, for example, you're trying to get faster at single strokes or double strokes, a lot of the time it's just a matter of doing exactly that. If you want faster single strokes, just practice single strokes. I think a lot of the time, perhaps even subconsciously, that question is embedded with this desire for, I guess, a shortcut, or some little technique or trick to get through it. And sometimes those little techniques and things sort of exist, but generally it's very much just a case of putting in the hours and just doing it, because the more you do something, the more it becomes second nature, the better you get at it. That's not to say, again, that there isn't fruitful advice that you can get in regards to, say, getting faster single strokes or double pedal playing, etc. And I can even elaborate on one of the methods that I've used myself. But foundationally speaking, it's always just been about putting in the hours. There's not really any way around it. And you can see that by the fact that there are so many drummers who are incredibly fast, for example. And we're just going to use speed as an example because it's a very common one. And there are a lot of really fast drummers, but almost all of them went about it in their own sort of ways or different ways. Although the one main variable, again, was probably just the time and consistent practice and frequent practice. That tends to be my answer to questions like that. But again, for the sake of trying to answer with a bit more depth, one method I've used for speed, for example, and I've got a video actually on my YouTube channel that you can check. It's called like Speed Tutorial. And that has been that, I found myself, especially when I was playing double pedal a lot back in the day, is I would get stuck, and we all hit plateaus, and that is normal. But I would just be like, why am I still stuck at 200 BPM, for example? Or even before then, 170. I remember being stuck around there for ages with the double pedal. And I think I read this comment or something, but it was a really good point that kind of hit the nail on the head for me. And that was that I just kept practicing that same tempo, or trying to. And I don't remember if I developed this myself or I found this out from someone else. But it's very much a method that helped me, and that was to basically set a metronome to about 5 to 10% faster than what you're capable of playing cleanly, in, say, maybe 3 or 4 bars. So however fast you can play single strokes for cleanly and in time for a couple bars, now add a certain, small percentage of tempo where Now for you to do that, it's going to be sloppy, but you can just about kind of pull it off. The point is, it's going to sound sloppy, but you're going to do intervals of that. So very much like interval training in the gym, and the process of progressive overload, if you know anything about that. It's essentially just adaptation, getting used to new thresholds. Again, I used to hit long plateaus of tempos because I just kept trying to do that same tempo. And it seems kind of counterintuitive, and you can take it too far, and it can be unresourceful. And yeah, unresourceful. I hope that's the word. If you are just trying to do, it's like someone going to the gym and trying to push way too much weight, and it's way too far out of their capacity. But I think there's so much value in just forcing yourself to overreach a little bit, and not to do this every time, but every now and then, maybe once a week, twice a week, or once a month. Doesn't matter, but that you force yourself, you force your body to adapt. That's very much what the body does. It evolutionarily, it adapts to its environment, the stress that it's under. That's why the more weight you lift, your body's like, oh, we'll keep it in the context of drumming. If you're really trying to force tempos, push tempos that you haven't really played before, your body's like, oh crap, like he's trying to do this. We need to build, I don't know, muscle tissue, whatever it is, so that we can facilitate this action that this human keeps trying to do. That's one way to put it, I guess. So basically, I would set a metronome to, again, like if back then I was capable of about 200, I set it to about 210, and I just did maybe 2 bars on, 2 bars off, 2 bars on, 2 bars off. So it'd be like, and obviously longer bars as well. You can completely vary or adjust the intervals, but the point is you're doing intervals on and off, forcing your body to adapt to those new tempos. That is very much a method that I think helped me and forced me to adapt to those higher thresholds, and to a point where I eventually got to a point of being able to play, I believe, around 230, almost pushing 240 beats per minute on the double pedal 16th notes, in really the span of probably less than half a year, from 200. So it increased quite a lot quite quickly, and obviously as you get faster and faster, the results tend to become slower, diminishing returns. But it's going to be really hard to accomplish those faster tempos and to become comfortable with them if you are just constantly playing the same tempos that you currently are. You need to force yourself to adapt to those new ones. So that's been one method that has helped me, aside from, again, the foundation being just frequent practice. It's such a boring answer, but it's so true. The more time you spend doing it, the better you're going to get at it. And obviously there's different ways to go about doing things like that, but generally that is the rule of thumb, in my opinion. And then to get to another commonly asked question, this tends to be, what cymbal do you think is the best? What do you think is the best bass drum pedal? What is the best technique that I can use? For the most part, I believe there is no best, especially in this context. It's very much a matter of preference, and I think most people know this, but especially a lot of beginners understandably want to know the best ways to go about doing things, and there definitely are better ways to go about doing things and better equipment that you can use, better cymbals, depending on your criteria. But for the most part, especially in the context of music, it's very much about preference. I would be a lot less focused on what someone else feels is the best cymbal, rather than, or the best kick drum or the best snare drum. Opinion matters, but I think it's so much more resourceful to just go on things like YouTube or go to a music store if you can and test out equipment, try the different things, listen to them and see what you feel about them, how you feel they sound. Is it the sound? This is another aspect as well, and why I really struggle to answer that question is because it really depends on what your goal is, what kind of music you're playing, who you're playing with, etc. Like, there are a lot of cymbals I love, but in certain contexts, it's not going to work. Like, you might like a big, deep brass snare, but you plan on or are going to play with like a jazz quartet or something. Context is everything. So I can never really answer this is the best cymbal, this is the best technique. For example, swivel technique, that's something I use and almost just happens naturally for me at higher tempos, where I'm doing this weird sort of swivel motion, if you know what that is. And that just seems to work for me. I've tried, when I was getting into double pedal, I was always, like a lot of drummers, I think, tend to play just heel up, which I still do. That's very much my staple, normal way of playing. But again, higher tempos, I tend to start swiveling, but that also came from like intent and practice back in the day, trying to get down the swivel technique. But I did practice things like heel toe and heel down and, the various techniques. For me, they just didn't quite click. And when I say that, it's important to note as well that no technique's really going to click initially, because you haven't built the motor patterns or the skill to really embed them. So, maybe had I spent years trying to get down the heel toe technique, I'm sure it would have happened. But for me, the swivel technique just seemed to happen a lot more naturally. So then with the practice and hours put into it, it sort of just, compounded in that sense. So that's really important to note, that when you're, especially with technique, you kind of need to just experiment and find what works for you, and then just see, what other people are doing and what they prefer. But that's them. You need to focus on what works for you, because, there's so many phenomenal drummers who play in such different ways. And I think that just sort of speaks for itself and the point I'm trying to get across, I guess. Yeah, so, what kind of equipment do I use? Losing motivation. These are sort of very common questions I get, but I think a lot of them are answered. The answer tends to just be time. Time and consistency. I find myself saying that a lot. I'm not frustrated by that, really. It's just something I found to sort of be the case. And I understand, again, why people would ask those questions, and that there are still other answers I can give and do give than just practice that. But that does tend to kind of be my message, and then I'll try elaborate a little bit more on what other things they could do. But for the most part, things like that just come down to time, practice, and, through that you'll find what equipment that you like and what technique that you like and how you like to practice. And that's actually something I would like to get into in this episode as well, is how I have gone about practicing drums. I have an older video on this YouTube channel talking about that, but for those of you who haven't listened to that or seen that video, I'm going to talk about it now. So I mentioned, I believe in the first episode, how I took drum lessons for 1 year. And again, I've been playing for about 12 years. I took lessons for 1 year and I quit. And I didn't quit because I didn't want to play anymore. It was very much the opposite, is I just wanted to play so much more, but in the way that I wanted to approach doing so. Again, I'm very much more of an intuitive, play by feel and ear type of player. I'm a lot less theoretically minded, perhaps. Again, I think a lot of musicians tend to fall somewhere on that spectrum of the more intuitive types and then the more theoretical types, and one is not better than the other. Both have pros and cons. Again, it's very much a sort of an alignment, I guess, of your temperament or personality that's coming through in that. And so for me, the lessons were helpful. I learned basic technique. I did learn to read, although not super proficiently, which I'm not casting any blame other than on myself in that regard. But my method was always just to play to music and bands that I loved listening to, and just learning the songs. And because I was always listening to music religiously and still do, I'm always absorbing. And I mean, we all do this, I think, although there's a difference between active listening and passive listening. Sorry if you can hear the traffic, by the way. I live by a very busy road and it can be quite distracting at times. But just absorbing as much music as I could and can, and really paying attention, especially the longer I play drums, just paying so much more attention to what the drummer was playing. Then when I would sit down, I would have those ideas in my mind, and it would sort of happen like that. And then, one thing I think I'm glad I was able to sort of get out my system, at least for me personally, and knowing how I learned the drums, was to not have such a obsession over learning the exact parts that another drummer played. I think it's so much more helpful to sort of get the ideas that they're conveying, the sort of the phrasings, how they go about playing the thing or the lick or the groove, and just sort of adapting it to your own voice, your own version. I was initially, but over time, and maybe out of lack of discipline, I don't know, but I was never, when I would watch YouTube lessons or watch a drummer play a song that I was trying to learn, I never ended up frustrated because I couldn't play exactly what they were playing. Maybe this is kind of a laziness in me, but it kind of worked out. Was that I would try to learn as much or get as much as I could of what they were doing, and then for the few bits that I couldn't quite play, then that's where I would just sort of just make up my own little bit or just adapt it to my own style or add an idea that I had. And I think that's something, a common thing that's talked about with artistry and musicians, for example, is that we kind of just steal from other musicians and creatives. Like, that's what most creatives do, is we just steal and then sort of put it out again in our own sort of way. We just adapt other people's ideas. There's probably no drum groove you could play that hasn't been played before, right? So I think what's important to do then is to take those drum grooves that have been played already, again, like a certain song that's already been played a certain way, and adapt it to your own playing. Obviously, context matters. So if you're doing a cover gig and it's a really famous song with very specific drum parts, then you're going to want to play it pretty much note for note, probably. But I think generally, especially with things like lessons on drum fills and certain grooves, yes, it's really helpful to try get down as much of that as you can, because firstly it proves your ability to really soak in that kind of information and to be able to comprehend it and then actually bring it to fruition. But I would not spend a lot of time, especially as a beginner or intermediate, probably stressing about not being able to get the exact same notes and accents that they do, because what value does that really have? At least again in most contexts and playing of music, I don't think it matters that much. Rather, I will hear a lick, and probably one that just physically I'm not capable of playing, at least at the moment, but that's fine. I get the idea, and then now I see how I can apply that idea through my current vocabulary and arsenal. And I love that, because then, sorry about that, the camera cut. But I love that because it's very much authenticity, right? It's you and your voice that's speaking, not someone else's. So I think there's so much value in being able to learn and take in what others are doing and try it yourself, but to not obsess and lose sleep over not being able to play it note for note 100%. I think especially with art, you want to be as much of yourself as you can, regardless of how much creativity or ideas that you steal. I mean, that's very much a part of it, but to then put it back out in the most original way possible. That's what I meant to say. So yeah, my point was that, for me, learning drums tends to come through music, listening to music, sorry. A lot of the songs I was listening to, I was then obviously trying to play on the drums, and in the early days I was very much into heavy rock, heavy metal, so that sort of steered my direction of what I was practicing and the kind of songs I was trying to learn, and especially considering a lot of those had fast double pedal or fast grooves that I wasn't quite capable of playing yet. That very much dictated what my practice looked like. It was just trying to play those songs, and again, even applying that sort of method of adaptation or forcing or overreaching, I'll call it, that I mentioned earlier, was playing songs that were a little bit too fast for me, but just trying to force myself to get them down. And surely enough, after maybe a week or a few weeks or a few months, I was able to do so, just because I kept forcing my body to adapt to that. That's very much been the bulk of how I've learned to play drums, has just been through listening and trying to play music. In the earlier years, though, it was very much a case that I was trying to learn songs almost note for note or as much as I could. But then as time progressed, grew my own vocabulary and sort of licks and grooves that I had in my arsenal, and I was then able to sort of explore in a more authentic manner, rather than less of a just copy paste sort of format, if that makes sense. So, outside of learning from just music that I was listening to, I tend to do this a lot. I have a lot of thoughts at once and I just struggle to articulate them. YouTube was such a huge and helpful, and still is, resource to me. And, I'm sure everyone pretty much uses it, but I still think it's undervalued, especially considering some of the questions I see a lot. Not even that I get myself, but that other drummers get, and that I just see in general. A lot of them you can have answered just through YouTube videos, YouTube resources, or Google, whatever it is. Being able to just, for example, type in the search bar, so and so live drum cam or drum lesson, and to have all that information at your fingertips it's of so much value that, like, I just can't even put that into words. To be able to have that accessibility anyway, is just phenomenal and should be utilized, and I think can really help speed up the learning curve for you, because to be able to just watch professionals do what they do through your screen from a safe distance without judgment, anything like that, is just going to be so helpful to you. And there are, you can find drum lessons on essentially any genre or style of music that you want online. So obviously YouTube was a huge resource for me. I learned so much from, and still do, just watching drummers, watching drum clinics and stuff. There's a lot of drum clinics that happen in the US, for example, that I can't attend or don't have the money to do so. So the fact that a lot of them are uploaded to YouTube is just amazing, and I think gets undervalued or underappreciated. And another method I've used is, and I'm sure you guys as drummers will with no doubt develop this syndrome, as I've heard it be called, drummer's syndrome. It's just tapping on things constantly. I'm someone who already tends to have a very active mind. I always have ideas, and so, for example, especially with drums, to not be able to play on loud acoustic drums all the time, or even a lot of the time. I live in an apartment, I can't play on my acoustic drums, but I can still, those ideas are still very much in my head. I still have my hands, I still have my feet, I can tap them out. Of course, it's not exactly the same, but to think that there's no real learning that can happen through that, I think somewhat foolish. And even though you might already be tapping, I think it's important to note how, again, useful that actually is, and how much it is actually helping you progress. For example, now in isolation, I haven't been able to play drums, but I feel like I've still very much been able to progress because I'm developing ideas, I'm watching YouTube videos, I'm listening to new music, and I'm tapping out new ideas. And another thing that leads to is the fact that because I've been working on these albums, actually writing and composing music has actually, I think, helped, I'd say, mature my drumming, because it's similar to being in a band or playing with other musicians. Composing music has had me it's forced me to pay so much more attention to what is going on and not to be so self-absorbed and focused on what lick can I throw here? Can I do this? Oh, this is a cool tempo. What if it, just to be more mindful of the music. I think that's very much a sign of maturity in a musician, is to, as you've maybe heard, serve the music, rather than have it be about you, unless you get that little section to do a solo, but have it be about the music, complement the music. That's huge. So you can learn. So, and even if you don't compose music, my point is that playing with musicians, being in the context of a musical situation or scenario, like in a live setting, not just playing drums in your bedroom or basement, etc., is just huge. So that, and in regards to also jam, this goes for listening to music, and I think jamming with musicians is, even though you're a drummer, I'm sure, this is quite easily understandable, is that you can learn so much from a guitarist or bassist or saxophone player, etc., just from the sorts of phrasings and ideas and melodies that they play. As a drummer, you'll learn very much to be able to accent and imitate the musicians that you play with. Specifically, I think maybe the more melodic instruments, for example, singers. I mean, obviously, for like bass players and drummers tend to have that, strong connection, the bass and the playing, the low end, etc., the rhythms, or the more rhythmic part of perhaps the band. But for me, I've learned, I'm not sorry. So I'm not, again, someone who does like sheet reading and stuff as my approach to learning. But for me, I can learn so much from just listening to a song, because every song for the most part is different. Obviously, they all share similarities, but there's different melodies, there's different phrasings, there's different timings, etc. So under that context, putting on a certain song, if I hear a certain phrasing, then that's a new phrasing that I can try accent in a different way. And then, apply things like call and response. And just, to me, there's so much, again, when you listen to music actively as opposed to passively, you'll realize there's so much that you can take and adapt into your playing. I just think it's phenomenal that I've been able to learn so much, in terms of, again, vocabulary and the kinds of licks that I can play and the grooves I can play. A lot of that comes from just having put in the time trying to accentuate or to accent certain phrasings and melodies that I hear in songs, and because they tend to always be different, then that sort of just continues to build and grow. And now, it's kind of self-explanatory, but learning, really paying attention to phrasings, melodies, rhythms in songs is something that can really help take your drumming to the next level, and to also very much make it more musical. That's, a huge aspect. That's, trying to think what else. My method for learning the drums. I usually, for the first almost 10 years, I was playing about 3 to 7 hours a day, and that was just me putting on my favorite music that I was either trying to learn or that I could already play but just jam to. And that's how I've almost always gone about learning music. Still to this day now, I can't practice as much as I could before, even outside of isolation. But what my practice tends to look like is me just rocking up to the rehearsal room, putting on music, whatever music I'm feeling as well, and to just start playing along and to let the ideas flow. Now, this isn't, I think, a method that perhaps a lot of beginners can necessarily apply in a super practical manner, because it's a lot easier once you have a larger vocabulary, again, or arsenal, things licks and grooves and ideas at your disposal. The bigger that becomes, the more you're able to, there's more options, obviously. So I think in the early days, learning specific drum parts, it's super helpful because you're coming from a place like this and there's all these ideas from the song, so you're able to branch out like that. But when you have this and then there's that song here. Then you're able to apply all this, and you know, it all just kind of, I don't know, it's hard to articulate. But I think as time goes by and as your vocabulary builds, then playing to music can become a lot more resourceful and easier to learn from, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so for me, that's just what practice tends to and has almost always looked like, is just playing to my favorite music, very much focusing on imitating parts and rhythms and melodies, phrasings that I hear. Same with playing with other musicians. And even, again, when not behind the drum kit per se, I'm still bringing ideas to fruition by tapping on things and really focusing on new ideas, or ideas, I think. Again, rather than trying to learn something note for note, rather taking the overall lesson or idea and then just applying that in my own way. That's been my method for learning and continuing to learn how to play drums, I guess. Sorry, I feel like this episode was quite scattered. And I know I knew that I wanted to do a Q&A section at the beginning, but again, I'm currently waiting on more specific questions for the next episode. So I think there will be a lot more format to the next episode. And as time goes by, I'm still very new to this whole thing, and I ramble a lot and struggle to articulate myself at times. So again, like, if you've stuck through the podcast this far, then I really appreciate your patience, and yeah, I'm just very thankful that you have. So thank you. I think this will pretty much wrap it up for episode 3. It might be a bit of a shorter episode. I'm not really sure actually how long this has been, or actually almost a way longer episode than normal. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. If you have any questions, discussion topics, anything like that, please put them down below. I'd love to talk about them, and just have more to go off of than just sort of going off. I don't know. I find it really hard to go off of just thoughts and stuff on the spot. It helps if I have some sort of clarity or direction, guidance. And that would be questions, things that you want me to talk about more specifically. So any feedback, things like that, please put them down below. And yeah, daily content essentially at my Instagram. The only reason I say essentially is at the moment it's been a lot more difficult in isolation. I obviously can't play drums, so I'm re-uploading videos from my archive, but I'm trying not to, use them all up. So it's kind of been like every second or third day that I'll upload a drum video, but I'm still, for the most part, doing album updates and sort of Q&As on there. So you can always check that out if you are interested. Chris Jenkins _drums. That's my Instagram if you want to check that out. If you want to see more podcast episodes and drum videos on my YouTube, then please subscribe. You can like the video if you like it, dislike it if you did dislike it, or if you do, please tell me why. I'd just be curious and to know what else I can improve. And yeah, for serious inquiries, chrisjenkinsdrums@gmail.com. Until then, I'll see you guys in the next episode, hopefully. So thank you. See you.